I'm Heather Anichini. I'm the CEO of the Chicago Public Education Fund, and it is my true honor and pleasure to be sitting up here with four of the most talented people that I know in this space, and to welcome all of you into an intimate conversation about how you might think through choosing your own innovation model. I know people are coming in from other sessions, so we'll let those folks get seated. If you're in the room already, maybe you can slide toward the center so that as those people come in, they have some place to sit. Or move toward the front. There's always open seats in the front. So the Chicago Public Education Fund is an organization, obviously based in Chicago, that focuses on growing the number of great public schools in our city. And we do that by thinking through great leaders and the power that they have with educator teams, and investing in great organizations who are willing to support those leaders and their teacher teams in changing what education looks like in our city. And we do that because we believe in Chicago as a community that change is possible in public education, and that the leaders and educators in our schools, in partnership with our students and our communities, will lead that change. We want Chicago to be a proof point for cities across the country in what's possible with educator-led, student-informed, and technology-enabled innovation. So I am excited to have my friends here with me today to tell you that story and to help you think about how you might make similar or different choices in your own environments. I always find it interesting when I come to conferences like this. People are walking around talking about user-centered design, and then you go to a bunch of panels where no one actually asks who the users are. So we're going to kick things off today giving ourselves a little bit of a sense of who you all are and what you might be trying to get out of today's panel. I just want to ask a couple of pretty simple questions and let people look around and get a sense of that. So how many of the people in the room today are entrepreneurs or vendors working with schools? Okay, maybe 20%. How many are funders who are supporting this work, either for-profit or nonprofit? Okay, slightly smaller percentage. How many of you are educators, current principals? Awesome. We were kind of hoping for that. And of the educators, how many of you are already doing something innovative in your schools or in your districts or networks? A lot of you. So hopefully, as we have this conversation today, we can provide some insight that will help you as you're making choices around the innovative models that you might bring to your schools. For those of you that didn't have your hands up just now, maybe we'll give you some new ideas or spark some controversy among your team, and that kind of debate will help move your innovative models further and faster in the months and years ahead. And then, maybe most importantly, we'll introduce you to 3 educators who can be great resources for you, and a nonprofit organization that's leading the work in Chicago and might help connect with nonprofit organizations in the places where you all work. The title of today's session is Choosing Your Own Innovation Model. That's because we assume you should have a choice. There are people who think differently about that. There are folks across the country who are saying, this model is showing that it can work, we should pick it up and move it to other places exactly as it is. And in Chicago, we really think about, of course, bringing best practices to bear, but letting our educators in partnership with the nonprofit community and their students and parents make choices about the innovation and the model that they're instituting. What you'll hear from our panel today is that each of the folks represented here had a theory of what they were innovating to change. So thinking about the theory of action came before the theory of the fix. They really got deep on what the challenge was and what they wanted to change before they introduced any kind of solution, even with fancy best practices and fun things that they got to see in the process. You'll also hear from our panel that rolling out innovation takes time. Much of the work that we'll talk about today started small and is expanding slowly over time to give us the opportunity to learn from that experience. We hope you'll hear that ongoing iterations are to be expected. Innovation and change in public schools is never ending. Every fourth grader only gets to have fourth grade once. So for each fourth grader, you want to have a new and better experience than the fourth grader before, because our society is demanding that we continue to evolve and change. Support organizations, we think, like LEAP, are critical if educators are going to do this work. And then you'll hear a little bit about how targeted philanthropic investments. So I know all the educators in the room noticed the people who raised their hands when I asked who was a funder in the room. And I know many of the vendors and entrepreneurs noticed it too. Targeted philanthropy, targeted funding at the right time can make an enormous difference for educators and their teams and for the nonprofit organizations that support them. So I want you to hear a little bit about that today. That's about it for me talking. The rest of the day will be you all hearing from this fantastic panel. I'm actually going to start from my far left. And so we're joined today by DeAndre Weaver, who's the principal at Gwendolyn Brooks High School on the city's south side. It's a select enrollment district school. Next to DeAndre, you'll see Karin Breo, who's principal of the Chicago International Charter School, an elementary charter school in Irving Park, which is on the city's north side. Sitting next to her, we have LeViis Haney. It's weird for me, Dr. Haney is how I normally think of him, who's a principal of Lovett, he loves it at Lovett Elementary, a neighborhood elementary school on Chicago's west side. So for those of you that know Chicago, what we have represented here is principals from every school type in every major section of our city, which is pretty incredible, I think. And a lot of the reason that we've been able to do that work is represented by the gentleman immediately to my left, Tim Carnahan, who's from Leap Innovations, which has been the lead sponsor and convener of the Breakthrough Schools work, which all three of the schools represented on today's panel have participated in. He's really led an effort with these three educators and others to help plan and design innovative new ways of doing work in schools across our great city. So I'm very excited to be joined by these folks, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming them today. We're going to get things started by talking about what I mentioned at the beginning, which is that you really have to understand the thing you're trying to change before you start instituting some kind of solution. And what we've seen at both Lovett and CICS Irving Park is a similar kind of challenge, but it manifested itself in pretty different ways. And the solutions that the two of you have started to implement look kind of different too. And what we're hoping to do for the audience today is make that real for them. And we did that in some conversations before this and thought it might make sense to start with you, LeViis, talking about Lovett. Can you talk about what it was like when you started this work?
I certainly can. Well, first and foremost, I took over a building where we created a catchphrase. We wanted our students to love it at Lovett. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, when I first started, that was absolutely not the case. No one loved being there. Students mindlessly filled out worksheets. Teachers, it was just a job. It was just a place to be and a place to earn a paycheck. And so we experienced very, very low levels of engagement from the adults as well as the students. And it manifested itself into a lot of data points that were, quite frankly, not conducive to teaching and learning. Our suspension rate was high. Our F&D rate was very high for our students. Our teacher attendance rate was very, very low. And so we knew we had to do something to change the culture at Lovett Elementary. And so our approach when we joined the Chicago Public Education Fund Summer Design program, they challenged us to address a problem. So what is your core problem? What's your root problem? And for us, we decided that that problem was student engagement. And so that was where we, in essence, determined where we would address the improvement of student learning in order to increase student engagement.
So I know you really dug into what that looked like. It wasn't just students with worksheets or just the data, but you came up with some pretty interesting ways of thinking about changing it. Can you give everybody a visual of what it looks like today and how it's different?
Absolutely. Well, we thought about student engagement. What will create a fun environment for kids so that they actually love learning? So first and foremost, what are kids doing when they walk into school and they're filling out worksheets? They are sitting in one spot and they are passive recipients of learning. So we started with first, how are students receiving their learning, first and foremost? Secondly, where are our students learning at? Can we think about where students like to learn best, for instance? Sometimes a chair and a desk is appropriate, but sometimes, quite frankly, that can be in different areas of the classroom as well as the hallways. We've really thought about strategically shaping a student experience where they actually get some movement, some voice and choice, et cetera. Another thing that we thought about was the actual student experience. This was difficult for us. We had to actually think about what does school look like for a student, okay? Like an actual student, not what we think the student sees, right? Because sometimes we think totally differently than what's actually happening. And so we went through that with our students, and now we think about our students' day differently. So just to give you an example, a student, I'm gonna give you an example of a student. Last year, this student spent the majority of the school year in the discipline office. This kid was constantly in the discipline office, and his mother was in the discipline office a lot. And so this year, this same student, I hadn't seen him in the discipline office, and I thought about him. So I went to his teacher, and I asked him a simple question. How did you keep this kid out of the discipline office? And his answer for me was very telling. He said, I don't. He said, I don't keep him out of the hallways. I let him go wherever he wants to go to learn, as long as it's within reason. And so that really told us a lot about really just radically shifting the way we provide instruction for our kids, the trust we have in our students in terms of what they're supposed to learn and how they're supposed to learn it and where they're supposed to learn it. So now this kid comes to school and he'll start off his day with a short mini lesson, right? And the teacher pushes out assignments to this student who receives his assignments via in the Google Classroom. So now this student, instead of walking through assignment after assignment after assignment from the teacher, instead he gets choice as to when, how, and where he will complete those assignments. And now this kid, instead of being forced to stay in a seat, he's now given the work, and he can take his work and do it wherever he wants to do on the floor. So now this same kid that was running up and down the hallway, now we catch him in a certain corner area doing his work. And so it's really amazing stuff, and it's just literally just a shift in the instructional delivery model for this student.
So changing what choice looks like and how you use space, I think, has been a critical component of how you're thinking about addressing the challenge of student engagement at Lovett. There were similar kinds of challenges that manifested themselves very differently, I think, at CICS Irving Park. Karin, can you talk a little bit about what you saw in the culture of the school to start, how you talked about that challenge with your team, and then where you've taken it since then?
Sure. So at CICS Irving Park, when I first started, I came in mid-year, and walking around the building, getting to know teachers and students in the classrooms, I just noticed that, and it's a very high-performing school. So we had pretty good performance. We had kids coming in we have high attainment at our school. And so just walking around the building, getting to know teachers and students, like I said, was just seeing that they were in rows, they were doing a lot of worksheets. kind of made me feel like how I learned when I went to school, which was a long time ago. And so, just walking through the building and seeing kids with their lack of engagement, again, we started with the summer design program as well. And so student engagement was our major focus. And, walking into classrooms, kids were really compliant. They wanted to do what the teacher told them. They're very task oriented. And so if you walked up to a child and asked, what are you learning about? Their answer would be, well, I'm finishing up my packet right now. It was never really linked to student learning. And so, that student engagement piece, getting kids excited about coming to school, it was hard. And one of our teachers, one of our best examples, I think, of the way our classrooms worked were we were doing, small group instruction, differentiated instruction, and one of the students came up and asked the teacher, I found a paper clip on the floor, what should I do with it? And it's like, oh my God, it's like throw it in the garbage or flick it on the floor, who cares? It was just, they're so compliant and they want to do the right thing. And if you say, well, why are you learning this or why are you doing this is what we used to ask. And now we're asking, why are you learning this? And before the answer would be, well, because my teacher told me to. And so it was a really interesting problem to try to solve because at our school, like I said, the kids were attaining at pretty high levels, and the challenge also was, taking a school from good to great. Not to sound cliche, but even standing in front of the staff members, we've got to, we're really good, but we've got to take this to higher levels, and so. Just design thinking with students and with the help of the summer design program, we did an amazing empathy activity where we interviewed parents, we interviewed teachers, and then all of the teachers, one of our professional development days, we broke up and different teachers from different grade levels interviewed students. And so our empathy activity really gave us a lot of how the kids were really feeling at school, and across the board, their overall answer was they wanted to be able to move. And like the little kids were like, I wish we had jetpacks and we could fly around the school, and some fun, exciting ideas that they had, not realistic, but we wanted them to just kind of like dream, like a dream world situation. And so a lot of them across the board they wanted to be able to move.
Yep.
And so I think the way we're kind of doing things now, that empathy activity was really, really strong for all of us, including the teachers. And we were able to be really innovative in our 3rd and 4th grade classrooms this year. And we've really put in just kind of teaching students how to be more engaged in their learning. And so asking them questions with their learner profiles about how they want to learn, where they learn best in the classroom, and also trying to connect to their learning. Like, why are we really learning this? And so that mind shift of trying to take them away from being so task-oriented was a mind shift for all of us as educators in the building. We're all kind of type A, and we wish someone could give us something and just roll it out. But it's been really fun to be innovative and to try different things to make sure that we're iterating for the students and that they're responding.
Yeah. I think as a parent, I thought about this conversation we had, students acting out versus getting really compliant, but in both cases not necessarily being motivated around the learning that they were being asked to do because the learning wasn't designed for them. My oldest gets really compliant when we ask him to do something that is kind of just for us, the adults, and my middle is much more like he's not going to do that and tends to act out. So I think we see students responding to similar sort of the learning is not designed for me in very different ways in these two schools, but the kinds of innovations that your teams have been testing are shifting that culture, and you're continuing to listen to students. So I hope people took that away. It's not just one round of empathy interviews or one round of shifting space. It's really thinking to yourself, I haven't seen that student in the discipline office. I better go find out what's changed and how we can reinvest in those strategies as a school. Or, I see different kinds of behaviors, what's going on, and asking students what's going on in order to continue to inform the work. I think that's, in both cases, really exciting what we're seeing at your schools. DeAndre, you had a slightly different kind of challenge that your team identified. So, we talk about choosing a model that works for your school and getting to the root of the challenge first. You did that, and your challenge was really at its core academic. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, very similar to CICS. So Brooks is a really really good school. It's a select enrollment high school, far south side of the city of Chicago. Kids test to get into the school, predominantly African American and Latino, and a huge low SES, low poverty, high poverty rate. And when I started at Brooks, I remember taking the job as a former assistant principal at one of the state's and the country's top schools. I remember taking the job at Brooks and looking at the students come in the building, and I saw just a whole lot of kids that looked like me that had so much potential, way more than I did when I was in high school, to be very, very, very successful. And all of their data said it. You know, they came in. This was when we were taking the Explore exam with ACT. And so all of their Explore data for incoming ninth graders were on par with the top schools in the state. So I knew coming in that those students had potential to be very, very successful. But those kids were not growing. Year after year, they would grow a point on the plan and then another point on the ACT. And so if they came in with an 18 or 19 average, they left with a 21. And that was an issue for me because those kids can grow a point without coming to school. So there was a real issue at Brooks that we wanted to try to tackle. And we tried everything. I think all of us will agree, you know, at some point when you're a building leader, you know what best practices are and you try to put those things into place, and you hit some students and some students are successful, but not everyone. And our mission at Brooks is to ensure each student learns at a very high level. So we are concerned with every single student. And although we had made a ton of progress over the course of 4 years, we still are not hitting every single student. And something interesting happened this year. There's a report came out from UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, and the newspapers, Tribune, Sun-Times, broke the story. And they said African American men between the ages of 18 and 24, 50% of them are either out of work and out of school. And that was a huge statistic for me to see, because most of the kids at the school are African American. And you know, a lot of my friends and my family are of the same descent. But to see stats that said that these students don't have a lot of options in the city was very concerning to me. And so over the last few years, we've been trying to figure out, like, how do we make learning specific for every single student in our school? How do we stop saying that we're a school of 900 and say that we're a school with 900 schools? And I think that's the theory that we're looking at over the next several years, is how do we create such a tailored experience for every single student in our school where they feel like they can be engaged at the level of where they are at that time, where they feel like they can be challenged if they need to. There's a student, his name is Samson Wu. He's the #1 kid in our junior class. Samson is a genius. He is amazing. He loves math and science. Like, this kid is, he is someone that I want my own kids to be modeled after. But Samson came to me one day and said, "Mr. Weaver, I love this school, but in some of my classes, I am not learning. I know this stuff." So that challenged me, because we're not just talking about kids that need additional time or additional support. And we're not talking about just the middle of the road kids. We're talking about kids that need to be pushed further. And so, you know, when I'm convicted, I try to convict every single other adult in the building. And I showed, and I recorded Samson, and I showed my staff a video of him saying that. And there were some folks that didn't like it, but I think most people understood that we needed to change. And so everything that we're doing now is all about how do we make sure that every single student that comes into our school can receive an education at their appropriate level, whether that be at a very, very high level, whether it be at a middle level, or whether that be at a level that they just need more time and additional differentiated supports. And so that's our thing. We have kids that can be very, very successful in AP. 30% of our students, and we've grown in the number of advanced placement courses that we offer our students from 9 to 21. And we've expanded the number of kids taking those from 200 before I started to last year we had 770 AP exams. And so we still had the same 30% of students passing that exam, which for us is like, wow, we stayed the same pass rate and we grew. Mm-hmm. So that said, there was a lot of great things happening, but it's still 30%. And you compare that to the #1 and 2 school in our state where their kids are passing AP exams at 84, 85%. We have a ton of work to do. But we know that we have the resources to do it. We know we have the right people in place. We have the right systems. We're thinking about the right things. But we know we have to do something differently. And let me end here. One of my favorite documents, and I found it when I was doing my master's level work at U of I in Champaign, Illinois. And it was a document created by Thomas Jefferson. It was written in 1779, a bill for a more general diffusion of knowledge. And that document helped create the structures for public education in our country. And the same setup that was created in 1779 is the same setup that we have in 2016, where students walk into a traditional classroom, into a building, it's 30 kids, they sit in rows, there's this amazing person that stands in front of them and gives them all this great information, and they're expected to learn it. But we've known for a long time that that doesn't work. And for some kids it does, but not for everyone. And so we're trying to figure out, like, what do we need to do differently so that it can work for every single one of our students?
I think in your example, as in the previous two, you've seen at Brooks that when you start with students and keep listening to students, and when you think not about 900, the average of the 900, or even the bubble kids in the 900, but each of the individual 900, that things start to change with the students. I've heard all of you talk about they have real ownership over their work, they're demanding more of us as educators. That can be a really scary thing as you're choosing a model, as you're investing in the work as a school leader with groups of teachers who may very well have chosen teaching because they're passionate about, I know for myself, I was super passionate about the subject, right? I wanted my fifth graders to know and love that subject as much as I did. But it's a really different way of teaching what you're talking about. And I think in this last year, and DeAndre, I want you to kind of comment on this and maybe others will add, it was a planning year for Breakthrough Schools, which for us means you sort of say, this is our core challenge and here's how we're gonna try to solve that challenge. We're gonna watch as we go and iterate at a small enough scale that we can see change over time. Usually, that's how it went in most schools, right? So this was a planning year, but DeAndre, you were implementing pretty big in the work that you were trying to do at Brooks. And I think you faced some challenges from the adults in the building. Can you talk a little bit about that as you're continuing to try to refine and actively choose a model with a team and supportive students?
Sure, yeah. So anytime you're attempting to change what people know to be true, especially in a school where they've seen success, it's going to be really hard to make the shift. And so some of the things that we've struggled with is just getting people to understand that because every single one of our students are not learning at a very high level, because we're not reaching and achieving our mission statement as we created it, that we have to keep doing things differently. And so one of the philosophies that we believe wholeheartedly in is becoming a professional learning community. And one of the core tenets of that is that we're constantly looking to improve, like we're never satisfied with where we are, and that we believe in this cycle of continuous learning. And that cycle of continuous learning, it sounds great, right, to talk it and educate and talk. But every day when you're trying to learn something new because you're trying to fix a problem that is every single day is not easy at all. And so we've had to try very different ways to get our folks excited about doing things differently. And when we first started, it was, using, it was saying how, our kids were not performing at a very high level. And, for a lot of people, they connected there. And I was a new person, so people wanted to connect with me. So everybody was gung-ho. But then we had some success. We achieved the highest growth on ACT in the whole city of Chicago. And folks got comfortable. Oh, great, we're not at 21 anymore, we're at 23.2, so we're good. And so then we had to remind people, okay, so we're averaging 23.2, and Todd Rose is here. I can't wait to see him because he talks about average, and we don't want to be average. So we had to say, hey, that's great, we made progress, but there's so much more that we can do for our students because they deserve it. And these numbers, although to us seem exciting, but to them equals access to some of the most prestigious universities and schools in our country. It means scholarship dollars. It means a different way of life. And so when we think about things that we do in the school, we have to think about these things in terms of choice and opportunities for students. That's the end result. So they don't become one of those statistics that I mentioned earlier. So one of the things that I thought was really helpful was the connection, the partnership with LEAP and Breakthrough and Chicago Public Education Fund, because these outside philanthropic groups said, hey, let's create this challenge for you and your teachers to think about a problem and do things differently. And so as a building leader, there's only so much you can do to compel people, especially in a short amount of time. So having an organization come from the outside and you be able to outsource that motivation there has been really, really important for us. And there are three things that we've tried tried to focus on these last, this last planning year that we're looking to develop into a huge innovative model over the next 5 years. And that's this idea of we want to be a completely personalized public high school in the city of Chicago. And so one of the things that we're doing now is that we're trying to create more of a mastery-based learning approach in our school. And many of you may know Benjamin Bloom for his hierarchy of thinking and application and all that stuff. But one of the things I love Bloom about most is his connection with this other guy named John Carroll and the work that they did around mastery learning. And basically, it's a very, very simple theory, and it's one of the theories that I've connected with the most. And it says this, that anybody can learn anything if they have enough time. I mean, it's really simple. Anybody can learn anything if you have enough time. And one of the things in a public high school is one of the things we don't have is a lot of time. And so we're constantly fighting against this idea of here's this structure that's in place by our district, by our state, by all these rules and regulations, but we know that our students need something else. They need more time. They also need corrective activities, enrichment, intervention, and very clear objectives in those things. So we've been trying to develop this model where we give students more time. And what that looks like in the interim is that instead of having due dates for when kids take exams, a student can show mastery on any number of learning targets any time throughout the course of the year. Teachers don't necessarily like that, right? Because what does that mean? It means I'm constantly creating assessments that tell us if you've learned it or not. Or I want to move on because that's how I know teaching and learning, but there's still some kids that are struggling with these concepts or skills that are very, very important. And we know that's a good problem to have because traditionally when kids struggle with things, we just kind of move on. But now we create a system that says, no, we cannot move on until students have mastered that. And so that's a really important component. The second component is this idea that kids can test out. Now, we're trying to figure this out. We don't have this at all yet. But basically what we want to create is if there's a sophomore or a junior like Samson Wu who is able to test out of his honors physics course in September, that he doesn't have to wait until August of the next year to go into AP Physics. No, we're going to just kill this idea of course names and just say, what are the learning goals in these classes? And then how do we allow folks like Samson Wu to continue on at his own pace? And so if he's at this level of astrophysics in December, then that's what he's working on because that's specific for him. And then finally, it's this idea that we want to allow students to give students the power to track their own progress. And we all know that it comes from a lot of work around goals and around if you set goals, you know you're much more committed to achieving those goals if you can track them. And I think we all are looking at how do we create this system or these learning management systems that allow students to see where they are anytime, any place, and not just for learning purposes, right, but their attendance, social emotional learning standards, and then these other non-cognitive skills that we're trying to figure out how do we measure. So we're trying really hard to think differently about how do we do this work in education, knowing that the model doesn't work for our students, and knowing that it's extremely hard. We don't have it figured out yet, but we have a core group of people, I would say 80% of our staff, that is really excited about trying to figure this work out.
So one of the things I think is really interesting, you know, we could have had any of the three folks up here give a very detailed answer like that about the way that they're implementing change. All of them have thought really deeply about every element of it and have engaged their teams in what those elements look like. DeAndre shared that from a high school perspective, which is a place, at least in Chicago, we've somewhat struggled to make this kind of change and start to create what it looks like because you've only got 4 years for lots and lots of reasons. So we wanted to share that depth at the high school level to kind of show as you're selecting a model, it doesn't matter if you're K-8 or high school or K-12, we've got a few of those I know in the room, but you really have to think about for whatever time it is that you have students, how are you engaging the adults and thinking differently about the experience that those students have over time? And I think that's a really inspiring piece of the story that you just shared. The other piece is the adults in your building are super engaged in this intellectual work of digging into the constant learning and improving process. And some of the teachers I've spoken to in your building, like, that's why they started teaching, was to figure out how to help kids, right? And to really be informed by data and helped by technology in ways that 20 years ago we couldn't have imagined. So really trusting your team and saying we're going to engage in this intellectual rigor together in order to serve each of our individual students is an interesting strategy, and one that I think you've all used to some degree or another. Now, all three of you have also mentioned both the Fun Summer Design Program, which is sort of an introductory course, if you will, to innovation, and of course, LEAP's very deep work with Breakthrough Schools. LeViis, can you talk about the dollars that come with a project like Breakthrough Schools and what they've meant for Lovett and your ability to move both the students and the adults in the building?
Absolutely. The additional funds were very, very critical because obviously we only have a certain amount of money to work with, right? To achieve all of the goals that we have for our students.
And in Chicago, we have a lot less than lots of other places, so yeah.
Yes, and here in Chicago, principals have a lot of autonomy over what we can do with with our discretionary funds, but it's very, very limited in terms of the things that you can do. This sort of work, it requires for us to do a lot of thinking, a lot of planning with our adults. And so within this process, it's teachers and principals and APs and administrative teams working together to determine what the problem is, to design supports for our students, and quite frankly, to see if it works. And if it doesn't, we need time to come back to the table and plan again and to iron out all of the kinks. And so monies that we receive to plan, we use them for just that. People should be paid for their time, quite frankly. And we know that our teachers, we just love to work for free, don't we? I mean, this is what we do. However, if we purchase a sandwich for those folks, would that help out a little bit? And unfortunately, we don't always get the monies and the freedoms to do those sort of things. So that's part of what we did with the planning monies, is to put it in the hands of the people who are really, really working hard to implement change. Also, there's
I just want to, for a second, I mean, so $30,000 per school is what was invested in Breakthrough and the planning year. And the kinds of changes we're seeing in terms of culture and academic rigor are exponentially bigger than that very small dollar amount. And I think that's one of the unique things that we've observed, is that for a relatively small investment in the right leader and the right team and the right school, you can get an awful lot done. Do you think you would have done it if you didn't have the $30,000?
Not as quickly, nowhere near as quickly. I mean, some of the change that we've seen in such a short period of time has just been amazing. And we know it's because of all of the hard work and all of the time that was spent in the planning. So one piece of advice that I give the room is be willing to take chances, and you can see a significant amount of change in really a short period of time. If you're willing to think outside of the box and to work together collaboratively.
And the sort of $30,000, the challenge element, DeAndre mentioned that, it's a competition, right? People do like competition. Those elements definitely help. In Chicago, my personal opinion is that one of the very biggest helps is the work that's been going on at LEAP. And you've heard folks on the panel talk a little bit about that. But Tim, I want to give you just a second to talk about how does LEAP work with schools in Chicago, and what role do you think nonprofits like LEAP could play partnering with other schools across the country?
So the first thing I would say, Heather, is that LEAP Innovations only works because of the amazing talent we have at the principal and teacher level in Chicago, and with the support we have from funders like you and the Next Generation Learning Challenge. And I just want to take a moment. I'm really pleased to see that we have a lot of other people in our Breakthrough Schools cohort here, like principals. So I don't know if you guys could raise your hand. I just want to give you some recognition to the other principals who are in the room here. And what LEAP Innovations does, we've been in Chicago for 2 years, and our basic idea is we want to increase personalization of student experience through a variety of different program models. So we have our pilot network program, which starts small, like on a classroom where people integrate a piece of ed technology in support of personalization, all the way up to Breakthrough Schools, which is a 10-month whole school redesign program with the second cohort launching last April. with our very brave cohort of schools who were spanning across Chicago. And so how did this happen, right? Like, what was this 10 months and what did we do? So the basic idea we brought forward was that the experts are in the room, meaning that schools and principals in those communities know what they need, and that we needed to put them in a position to sort of define what those problems are. As you can see, they did that beautifully, and then come up with some solutions with a framework around it. So LEAP has what we call our personalized learning or LEAP learning framework, which is based on like 4 core components of personalized learning. One is getting to know your students and learners better and modeling learning after that. You heard them talk about this. Learner-led, which is basically this idea that learners should have some control over their learning. You've heard them talk about that as well. Learner-advanced, which is that students should be able to progress through content at a pace that works for their own academic level. And then what we call anytime, anywhere learning, which is basically like how do you bring communities together. And we basically said, all right, 15 schools, let's go through a design thinking process, we'll connect you with some national experts, define your problem, and come up with some solutions that can bounce against these different components of our framework. And I think one of the important value propositions that we brought forward as a nonprofit was that unlike a district where there's a strong accountability going on in terms of what is happening in the schools, we were able to say to the principals and the teachers, what do you think? When you're running into ambiguity, what answers do you have to solve your own problems, right? Because we felt like it was important for us to build up the agency and efficacy of the people within the program, right? So they can actually start working in that way with their students. And it's hard for districts to be able to say, oh no, just try a few things out, just try this thing out. You can spend this money in different ways, however you'd like. So we were able to cultivate that experimentation. And I would say that all 15 schools who came through the program have all put forward very different models that have the potential to radically change learning within the school. So that's kind of it in a nutshell there.
And I think that LEAP has been so unique because it does have relationships with national experts that it can bring to bear, but it also has on-the-ground Chicago context. So, you know, we have a really low per pupil in Chicago. Our principals in the traditional district system have more autonomy than principals in most district systems across the country. Our charters are both networks and individual charter sites. They're all over the city and can control a sizable market share in terms of the students. You know, so having the local context and the national expertise has, I think, been a very valuable thing for the schools sitting and the principals sitting up here today.
You're also hitting on another important thing, Heather, which is that an organization like LEAP can really bring schools of different contexts together to work closely in a collaborative way. Charters and district schools don't often work together or share information, you know, and work, you know, to recognize that they're trying to solve the same problems.
Yeah.
And so through this program, we really brought together a very diverse group of schools who started cross-sharing and doing some cross-pollination of their models as well.
Yeah, and we had some chats about that as we were preparing for this. I don't know, do any of you want to share what's that been like? If you read the newspaper in Chicago, you might think charters and district schools are mortal enemies of some kind, waging, you know, a comic book kind of war. But here we are, sitting up here with 3 of them from very different school types, and you saw those hands raised representing charters and district schools from across the city. So how did that happen?
Well, I think without this experience, I don't think it would have happened. And so I think it's been so amazing to have the opportunity to go into each other's schools and just see the innovation that we've all put in place, because we've all been kind of working separately with our teams to address the problems in our schools. And those problems are all different at so many different levels at each campus. And so I think without this experience, we never would have gotten to know each other and been able to collaborate as well as we did, because it's been so positive. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to do what's best for kids. And so I think without the experience, we probably wouldn't have gotten to know each other and be able to work so closely.
Yeah. Would you two agree? Anything you would add there?
Absolutely. Seeing is believing. I think that has been a great form of professional development for the leaders. And so to be able to go into other schools and some of our charter partners and collaborate and learn has been absolutely critical for Lovett. And now we're able to bring things for our children at Lovett as a result of those collaborations. So it's been very awesome.
And that collaboration went beyond just local too. As part of the program, We brought the 15 schools out to California to see a variety of different innovative school models, to see some replication, things they might want to try, different problems that those schools are trying to solve, and engage them in that sort of collaborative process as well.
And I think, we started the conversation today by saying educators have a choice in the model that they implement around innovation. And I think one of the sort of rules we try to follow in Chicago is not to be constrained by governance or some arbitrary line of difference in terms of trying to identify places you can learn from. So I've seen all of you and many of your colleagues just reach in ways that across aisles and across neighborhoods and across states in order to really learn and to foster this idea that if we're what we're after is making sure that our students are learning in a really personalized way, we have to be disciplined enough to take learning from anywhere we can get it as the adults that are responsible for that kind of work. And I've just been so proud, really, to be a part of that kind of work in Chicago and to see the kind of influence it can have on other parts of the country. I do want to, give folks on the panel an opportunity to give advice. So we started the day by learning that we have mostly teachers and principals in the room, but we have a few entrepreneurs and a few funders. So I'll let you choose to whom you want to address your advice, but definitely want to give our panel here a chance to sort of share their final thoughts.
Well, first, if you're a funder, is Lovett, Lovett, where our students love it at Lovett. One bit of advice that I have for the audience is, Heather, you talked about all of the pressure we're under as schools. We know that we want our students to succeed. We know that we want our students to succeed on tests and those sort of things. But what are we really in this for? We want students to learn, right? And if we really want our students to learn, we have to be willing to think outside of the box. So first and foremost, don't be afraid to take a risk and to take chances, in this process, particularly when you have such a vast network of folks across the country that are engaging in this work, first and foremost. So that is the biggest piece of advice that I have.
I think that's great educator advice, and I would challenge the entrepreneurs in the room and the funders in the room to think about how they can raise up the stories of the people that are taking those chances. I think for us at the fund, we really, and I know LEAP too, we see that as part of our responsibility because it can be really hard to be the only brave person if you think you're the only brave person in the city. But when you start to hear from and see others being celebrated for that kind of courage, and for that kind of deep work with teachers and parents and communities and students, it can be really inspiring. But educators can't do that by themselves. They can't both do the brave and hard work of taking chances and raise up the incredible examples as they start to emerge. And so would encourage funders and others to take that on as part of their responsibility. Karin, I'm going to give you the last word today, but DeAndre, do you want to add anything quickly before we do that?
Yeah, just if there are any principles as you learn, because I know I'm always looking to learn something new about personalized learning or just anything innovative in education. I found it was really important to make sure that my teachers were learning at the same rate that I was learning, because sometimes we can learn things, we know it's great, but then we can forget a whole lot of other people. So just find ways to make sure that as you're learning new things, that your folks are on campus are also learning.
And that's another place I'll hit nonprofits, funders, and others in the room. And frankly, our entrepreneurs could be really helpful here. Teachers who are engaging with particular kinds of technology should be talking to each other across schools. It shouldn't just be, me and the other fifth grade teacher across the hall. And encouraging teachers to engage in that way with one another, we've seen have really productive results. LEAP does a lot of that with their pilot network in Chicago. All right, Karin, you got to sum it all up and inspire everybody as they walk out the door.
Well, what they said. And also, I think just getting behind the why. At our school, things were going pretty well. We had pretty good attainment. We have a lot of parent involvement at my school. But for Irving Park, I think the biggest piece was getting behind the why for all stakeholders. So getting the teachers behind it. Why do we want to participate in this? For the families, it was really important that we got the families alongside of us. And so with the planning grant, we were in 3 classrooms. We blended 2 third grade classrooms and 1 fourth grade classroom. And so it was all about taking them along this journey with us. And I think that we did a really good job with that. And so they're bought in, the kids are bought in, the teachers have bought in, and just really getting them to see how much fun that we can all have together as we work together, and also admitting, we don't have all the answers, so that growth and dynamic mindset has been really important. And then also I think when it gets tough, it was really good for us to go out and see things, because we ran into some hurdles for sure. Couple days of tears here and there. What are we doing? What do we do next? Because we don't have all the answers. It's pretty innovative work. It's different. It's a different way of thinking about things. And so for us, I know when we felt really challenged, it was important to get out and go see it, to know what was possible. And we had other people in the cohort, from cohort 1 actually, that we could kind of rely on and ask questions, and Leap did a great job of supporting us with getting in touch with the right people when we kind of got into a hurdle.
Yeah. So I think in terms of my job of summing up what I hope was an interesting conversation for all of you today, I just want to make sure that folks are taking away the message that you're not alone in this very brave and sometimes very hard work. And that one of the things we found is that educators and entrepreneurs in this space, and even funders in this space, are among some of the most generous people out there. And so I've never asked to come see a school and been told no. I've never seen people unwilling to share resources back and forth among this community. And this work, choosing a model that's going to radically transform what's happening in your school, is an all hands on deck effort. And not thinking about it as just you, principal, or just principal, small teacher team, but really thinking about yourself as a part of a much bigger community of educators, nonprofit leaders, entrepreneurs, and funders who want to tell this story about what's really possible for our kids. I know to that end, our folks are going to stick around for a little bit today after this panel. Please come trade cards, have a conversation about what might be next in your schools, help us learn in Chicago from you, and let us show you what we're doing in ways that hopefully inspire and motivate you to do much more. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone.